she pleaded. "Apache, hide me till dawn." His price made her tremble. The desert wind felt like ice against Lila's face as she ran. It pushed against her, tugged at her dress, and filled her mouth with the taste of dust. Each breath burned in her chest. Her legs were heavy, and her feet ached from the sharp stones beneath them. Still, she did not stop. Behind her, somewhere far in the darkness, were men who would not easily give up. She did not know how close they were. She did not know if they had seen which direction she had taken when she slipped away from the wagons. All she knew was that if they found her before sunrise, everything she had risked would be for nothing. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and watchful. It cast thin silver light over the wide desert, turning rocks and bushes into strange shapes that seemed to move when she looked at them. More than once she stumbled because she thought a shadow was a person reaching for her. Her heart would jump into her throat, and she would turn quickly, only to see emptiness behind her. Hours earlier, she had been sitting quietly near the wagon fire, pretending to mend a torn piece of cloth. The other travelers had been talking in low voices. Some were tired. Some were arguing. The journey west had not been easy for anyone. Supplies were low, tempers were high, but Lila's trouble had started long before that night. When she had first joined the wagon train, she believed it would lead her to freedom. The leader, a smooth-talking man named Carter, had promised safe passage and fair treatment. He had spoken kindly at first, offering help when her horse went lame, assuring her she would reach the new settlement without trouble. Over time, his kindness had changed. His words had grown sharp. His smiles had disappeared. He began making decisions for her without asking. When she questioned him about money she had paid for supplies, he brushed her aside. When she said she wanted to leave the group at the next town, he laughed as if she had made a joke. "You're safer with us," he had said. "Out here alone? You wouldn't last a day." That sentence had stayed with her. Not because she believed it, but because she understood what he truly meant. He did not want her to leave. He wanted control. That night, when most of the travelers were asleep and only a small fire remained glowing, she had overheard something that turned her fear into action. Carter and two others had been speaking behind one of the wagons. Their voices were low, but the desert carries sound in strange ways. "She won't get far," one of them said. Carter had answered, calm and certain. "She won't try. She knows better." That was the moment Lila knew she had to prove them wrong. She had packed nothing except a small canteen and a thin shawl. Taking more would have made noise. She had untied her horse carefully, but then stopped. A horse would leave tracks too easy to follow. So she had whispered an apology to the animal, turned away, and slipped into the darkness on foot. Now, as she ran across the open land, she wondered if she had made the right choice. The desert at night was not like the desert by day. It was colder than she expected. The air cut through her thin clothes. The ground was uneven, full of hidden dips and loose stones. Every few steps she felt herself losing balance. Once she fell hard onto her hands and knees. Pain shot through her palms, but she bit her lip and pushed herself up again. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant fear. She tried to focus only on the sound of her own breathing. Inhale. Exhale. One step, then another. After some time, she slowed to a fast walk. Her legs trembled from exhaustion. She turned and looked back. The horizon behind her was dark and silent. No lantern light, no movement. But that did not mean they were not searching. She had grown up near a small farming town, far from this harsh land. There had been green fields and a river where children played in summer. She had never imagined she would one day be alone under such a wide and empty sky. Back home, nights were filled with the soft sounds of insects and distant dogs. Here, the silence felt heavy, almost alive. A sudden cry echoed somewhere to her left. She froze. It was only a desert bird calling into the night. Still, her heart pounded wildly. She hugged her shawl tighter around her shoulders and kept moving. Time felt strange. Minutes stretched like hours. The moon seemed to move too slowly across the sky. She tried to guess how long it would be until dawn, but she had lost all sense of direction. The stars above were bright and countless. She wished she knew how to read them. She wished she had paid more attention when her father once pointed at the sky and explained how travelers found their way. "You never know when knowledge will save you," he had said. She swallowed hard at the memory. Her canteen was already half empty. She forced herself to take only small sips. The water was warm, but it eased the dryness in her throat. She knew she could not waste it. After walking for what felt like forever, her steps began to slow again. Her body begged for rest. Her eyes felt heavy. The ground ahead blurred slightly. She climbed a small rise, hoping to see something, anything. that might guide her. When she reached the top, she nearly collapsed. The land stretched endlessly in all directions. Rocks, low bushes, and open sand. No trees. No buildings. No clear path. Fear crept back into her chest. What if Carter had been right? What if she could not survive alone? She closed her eyes for a moment and forced herself to think clearly. Panic would not help her. She needed shelter. A place to hide until morning. Somewhere the riders would not think to look. As she opened her eyes again, she noticed something faint in the distance. At first she thought it was her imagination, a trick of moonlight. But no. There, far across the dark land, was a small, steady glow. Firelight. Her heart began to race again, but this time with a mix of hope and fear. Fire meant someone was there. It could be a traveler. It could be a small camp. It could be danger. She stood very still, watching it. The light did not move like a lantern being carried. It flickered in one place. A campfire. If she changed direction and walked toward it, she would lose time. If the riders were behind her, they might close the distance. But without shelter, she might not last until sunrise. The wind picked up, carrying a faint scent of smoke. Real. Not imagined. She made her choice. Pulling her shawl tighter, she began walking toward the light. Not running now. She did not have the strength. Each step felt careful, uncertain. As she drew closer, shapes began to form around the glow. A low fire. A horse tied nearby. A figure standing tall beside the flames. She stopped suddenly. The figure had seen her. Even from a distance she could feel his stillness. He did not rush toward her. He did not shout. He simply stood there, watching. The firelight revealed the outline of a man dressed in traditional Apache clothing. His posture was straight, steady, and calm. He looked as if he belonged to the land itself. Her mouth went dry. She had many stories during the journey west. Some were respectful. Others were full of fear and misunderstanding. In that moment, none of those stories mattered. Only the present did. She was alone, exhausted, and running out of time. The man did not move as she slowly stepped into the circle of firelight. His face was serious, but not cruel. His eyes were sharp, observing everything, her torn sleeve, the dust on her skin, the fear she could not hide. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The crackling of the fire sounded loud between them. She felt suddenly small under his steady gaze. Her legs trembled, not only from fatigue now, but from uncertainty. If he refused her, she would have nowhere else to go. She swallowed and forced herself to speak, though her voice shook. Apache. Hide me till dawn. The words felt fragile in the cold air. Silence followed. The wind moved through the rocks behind them. The horse nearby shifted slightly, but remained calm. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing more than just her request. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared he could hear it. In the distance, carried faintly by the night air, she thought she heard something. Hoofbeats. Far away, but real. Her eyes widened. She looked back at him, desperation clear on her face. I have nowhere else, she added softly. The desert seemed to hold its breath. And then, at last he spoke. The firelight moved gently across his face, showing calm eyes that missed nothing. He looked at her torn sleeve, her shaking hands, the dust on her shoes. He noticed how she kept glancing back into the darkness. He noticed the fear she was trying hard to hide. The sound of distant hoofbeats drifted again through the night air. He stepped slightly to the side, blocking part of the firelight from reaching her, making her harder to see from far away. It was a small movement, but it told her something important. I would be so happy, he was thinking. You ask for protection, he said at last. His voice was steady and low. Protection is not a small thing. Lila swallowed. Her throat felt tight and dry. I know. Protection has a cost. Her heart dropped. She had nothing. No money, not even proper shoes for the desert. The small canteen hanging from her shoulder was half empty. If he asked for payment, she would have no way to give it. I don't have gold, she said quickly, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound brave. I don't have anything of value. I did not ask for gold. She blinked, confused. Then, what do you want? She asked softly. He looked past her toward the dark horizon, listening carefully. The hoofbeats were faint, but closer now. He seemed to measure time by sound alone. Truth, he said. The word surprised her. Truth, she repeated. You will tell me who follows you. You will tell me why. And you will not lie. The desert wind moved between them. The fire cracked softly. Lila hesitated. Telling the truth meant speaking about her mistakes. It meant admitting she had trusted the wrong man. It meant explaining why those riders might be angry enough to chase her through the night. She had never liked showing weakness in front of strangers, but this was not the time for pride. "If I tell you," she said slowly, "will you help me?" He did not answer the question directly. "If I decide to help you," he said, "I must know what danger walks behind you. I will not protect a lie." His eyes held hers firmly. There was no cruelty there, only firmness. He was not a man who made quick promises. She took a shaky breath. "My name is Lila," she began. "I joined a wagon train 3 months ago. I paid for safe travel west. The leader's name is Carter." She saw no reaction in his face, but she continued. "At first he was kind." He spoke gently. "He helped me when my horse became weak. He said I would reach the new settlement safely if I stayed with the group. Things changed. He began making decisions for me. He kept track of my money and said it was safer that way. When I asked for it back, he said I should trust him." The man listened without interrupting. Even the way he stood showed attention. He was still as stone, yet fully aware. "He told me I would not survive alone," she continued. "He laughed when I said I wanted to leave the group at the next town. Tonight I heard him telling 2 others that I would not try to run. They sounded sure of it. A small spark popped in the fire. I did try," she said quietly. "I left when most of them were asleep. I took nothing but water. If they find me, they will force me back." She lifted her eyes to his again. "That is the truth. Not very close, but no longer far away." He nodded slightly, as if weighing her words. "You left on foot," he said. "Yes. You know the desert is not gentle, but staying was worse." Something shifted in his expression then. Not softness exactly, but understanding. He walked around the fire once, thinking. His movements were calm and careful. Lila watched him, unsure what his silence meant. Every second felt long. "You fear them?" he said finally. "Yes. But you do not speak with hate?" She blinked at that. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I only want to be free." He studied her face as if searching for hidden meaning. The desert teaches people to read small signs, the tone of a voice, the way someone stands, the truth behind eyes. He seemed to be doing exactly that. The hoofbeats were closer now. She could clearly hear at least 2 horses. Her pulse raced. "If you will not help me," she said quickly, "tell me now. I will not bring trouble to your fire." "You would walk back into the dark alone?" he asked. "If I must," she answered, though fear tightened her chest. Turned toward the horse tied near the camp. The animal stood calmly, ears alert but body relaxed. The man placed a hand gently on its neck, then looked again at the horizon. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority. "You may stay until dawn." Relief rushed through her so fast her knees nearly gave way. "But," he continued, and her breath caught again, "you will follow my word without question. If I say move, you move. If I say stay silent, you stay silent. If danger comes, you trust me." "I will," she said immediately. "Do not answer too quickly," he replied. "Trust is heavy. It requires courage." She met his eyes steadily. "I have already chosen courage once tonight." For a brief second, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. "My name is Dakota," he said. "Dakota," she repeated softly. The sound of riders carried clearly now. She felt her heart jump again. Dakota moved fast, but without panic. He knelt and began covering the fire with sand, pressing it down until the flames died and only faint warmth remained. Darkness wrapped around them, broken only by moonlight. He gestured for her to step away from the open ground. "Come," he said quietly. She followed at once. He led her toward a line of tall rocks that looked ordinary from a distance. Up close, she saw a narrow space between them, almost hidden by shadow. He guided her through it carefully. Inside was a small natural hollow, protected from open view. "Stay low," he instructed. She crouched, her hands shaking. The hoofbeats were close now, very close. She could hear the sound of leather, the quiet snort of horses, the murmur of men's voices. Her breathing grew fast again. Dakota crouched beside her, his posture steady. In the darkness, she could barely see him, but she could sense his calm. "Slow your breath," he whispered. She tried. "Inhale." The riders came into view across the open ground where the fire had been. One of them dismounted and examined the sand. "Someone was here," a voice said in the distance. Leela's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give them away. Dakota remained still as stone. "They moved on," another voice replied after a moment. "Tracks head that way." She realized then that Dakota had brushed away signs of her steps near the camp. He had thought ahead even while listening to her story. The riders turned their horses. For several long seconds they did not move. Then, slowly, the hoofbeats began to fade. Lila did not realize she had been holding her breath until it rushed out of her in a shaky exhale. She looked at Dakota in the dim light. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is not over," he said quietly. "The night is long." But something inside her had changed. When she had first stepped into the firelight, she had expected a different kind of price, something she could not give, something that would frighten her in another way. Instead, his price had been honesty, trust, obedience, and danger. It had made her tremble because it required her to be brave in a new way, not by running, but by placing her safety in someone else's hands. Outside the hidden rocks, the desert returned to silence. Dakota listened a while longer before speaking again. "You chose to leave control behind," he said quietly. "Now you must choose patience." She nodded again, pulling her shawl tighter around herself. For the first time since she had fled the wagons, she felt a small, fragile thread of hope. Dawn was still hours away. But she was no longer facing the night alone. It was still cold, still dark, still wide and endless. But now Lila was no longer running without direction. She was hidden between tall rocks beside a man who understood the land far better than she ever could. Dakota remained crouched near the narrow opening of the rocky space. He did not relax just because the hoofbeats had faded. His head tilted slightly from time to time, listening. The desert had its own language, wind patterns, shifting sand, distant animal calls. He seemed to understand every small sound. Lila tried to steady her breathing. Her heart was still racing, but slower now than before. The fear had not vanished, but it had changed shape. It was no longer wild panic, it was waiting. After several quiet minutes, Dakota moved. Men who do not know the land believe distance is the only answer. They do not fully understand, but she trusted him enough not to question. He stepped carefully out of the rocky hollow and motioned for her to follow. She stayed low, copying his movements exactly. The moonlight washed the ground in silver as they moved away from the old camp spot. Instead of walking straight across open land, he led her along the side of a rocky ridge. The ground there was harder, less likely to show clear tracks. He placed his feet with care, and she stepped where he stepped. After a short climb, they reached a higher ledge hidden behind large stones. From there, they could see far across the desert without easily being seen themselves. "Stay here," he whispered. They crouched together behind a rock that blocked the wind. The air was sharp and cold against her face. She wrapped her arms around herself and watched the open land below. For a while, nothing moved. Then, faint shapes appeared in the distance. Riders. Her stomach tightened. "They came back," she breathed. Dakota nodded once. They doubt their first choice. The riders spread out slowly, scanning the ground. One leaned low over his saddle, studying tracks. Another pointed toward the direction she had originally run before changing course toward the fire. Lila's fingers curled tightly into her shawl. "If they find the camp," she whispered, "they will know I met someone." Dakota did not answer right away. His eyes were focused, measuring distance and movement. "They already know someone was there," he said calmly, "but they do not know who. And they do not know where that person went." Below them, one rider dismounted again and walked in a wide circle, examining the sand. Another turned his horse toward the ridge, though not directly toward their hiding place. Lila's heart pounded so loudly she feared the sound would roll down the slope like a loose stone. Dakota placed one steady hand on the rock between them, grounding himself. His calmness seemed almost unreal. "How can you stay so still?" she whispered. "The desert rewards patience," he replied quietly. "Those who rush often lose." The rider on foot stopped suddenly and knelt. He brushed the sand aside with his hand. Lila held her breath. He stood again and called out something to the others. Though she could not hear the exact words, she understood the tone. Uncertainty. The riders began arguing. Their movements grew sharper, more frustrated. One pointed east. Another shook his head. Dakota watched closely. "They are tired," he said softly, "and angry." "Yes," he agreed, "but also careless." The rider who had pointed east finally turned his horse in that direction. After a moment of hesitation, the others followed. Lila did not move until the shapes grew smaller and smaller against the pale sand. When they finally disappeared beyond a distant rise, she released a long, shaky breath. "Will they come back again?" she asked. "Maybe," Dakota said honestly. "But the sun will rise soon. Daylight changes the hunt." She glanced at the sky. The moon had shifted lower. The stars seemed softer now, less sharp. A faint hint of gray touched the far edge of the horizon. She had never been so aware of time before. They remained on the ridge for a while longer. Dakota did not rush to leave. He seemed to wait for the desert itself to confirm safety. Lila's thoughts began to settle. She realized something important. If she had continued running in a straight line, the riders would likely have followed her tracks easily. If she had hidden behind a random rock, they might have found her quickly. Dakota had chosen height. He had chosen stone instead of sand. He had chosen stillness instead of distance. "You knew they would circle back," she said quietly. "Yes. Men who think that way assume fear makes foolish choices. They expected you to run far and without thought. I almost did, but you did not," he said. His words carried no praise, only truth. The wind softened for a moment, and the desert seemed almost peaceful. A small bird flew across the early light, its wings cutting gently through the air. Lila felt exhaustion pressing down on her now that the immediate danger had passed. Her legs ached from the long run. Her palms still stung from when she had fallen earlier. Her throat was dry. Dakota noticed her weariness. "You need water?" he said. She hesitated. "I have some left." "Keep yours," he said simply. From a small leather pouch tied at his side, he removed a container and handed it to her. She looked at it uncertainly. "It is safe," he said. She took a careful sip. The water was cool, much cooler than her own. It refreshed her in a way she had not expected. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once. As the light grew stronger, the land below changed color from silver to pale gold. Shapes became clearer, shadows shortened. With daylight, hiding would become more difficult if the riders returned, yet daylight also made long searches tiring and visible from far away. Dakota finally stood. "They will not search close to where they argued," he said. "Pride will push them elsewhere." "Where will we go?" she asked. He looked toward a narrow canyon far to the north. "There is a place there," he said. "Hard to see unless you know it." They began moving again, this time along the ridge, instead of across open ground. The climb was steeper than before. Lila slipped once, but Dakota caught her arm quickly and steadied her. "Slow," he reminded her. "The land is not your enemy if you respect it." After some time, they reached the entrance of a narrow canyon hidden behind tall rock walls. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a shadow between stones. Up close, she saw it opened into a small protected space. Inside, the air was calmer. The walls blocked the wind. A few small desert plants grew near the edges, where tiny drops of moisture sometimes gathered at dawn. They stepped inside. "You can rest here for a short while," Dakota said. She sank down onto a flat stone, her body grateful for stillness. The sky above the canyon walls was turning soft pink now. For the first time since she had run from the wagons, she felt a small sense of safety settle in her chest. But it was fragile. "What if they return with more men?" she asked quietly. Dakota leaned against the canyon wall, arms relaxed but alert. "Then we choose again," he said. "Choose what?" "The next step." He did not speak like someone who feared the future. He spoke like someone who accepted that danger was part of life, not something to panic over. The eastern sky brightened further. The first true rays of sunlight touched the tops of the rocks, turning them warm gold. Lila looked toward the opening of the canyon. Dawn was coming. But deep down she sensed something. The night had tested them. The riders had searched and failed. Yet she could not shake the feeling that one of them, perhaps the most stubborn, would not give up so easily. And somewhere beyond the rising light, a single rider was still watching the land, unwilling to turn back. The first light of morning slowly filled the narrow canyon. The cold blue color of night faded into soft gold. The tall rock walls around them began to glow as the sun touched their edges. Lila watched the change carefully, as if the rising light itself was proof that she had survived something important. She had not slept. Her body was tired, but her mind would not rest. Every small sound still made her alert, a loose pebble rolling somewhere above, the flap of a bird's wings, a faint whisper of wind passing over stone. Dakota stood near the canyon entrance, looking out over the open land. His posture was calm, but she could see that he remained watchful. He did not move like someone who believed danger was gone. He moved like someone who knew that safety was never permanent, only temporary. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lila studied the land from where she sat. In daylight, the desert looked less frightening than it had at night. The shadows were shorter, the shapes were clear, the horizon felt wider and less mysterious. Yet she understood something now. The desert had not changed, only the light had. "You do not rest?" she asked quietly. Dakota glanced at her. "Rest comes when it is earned." "Have we not earned it?" "Not yet," he said calmly. She followed his gaze out toward the open land. It looked empty, peaceful, but she trusted his instincts more than her own. After a few minutes, he stepped fully into the sunlight and scanned the distance carefully. Lila rose slowly and joined him at the edge of the canyon, though she stayed slightly behind him. From their higher position, she could see far across the desert. There were no riders nearby, no movement, just open land stretching endlessly under the brightening sky. "It looks quiet," she said. "Quiet does not always mean safe," he replied. His words stayed with her. She looked at him for a moment before speaking again. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. He did not answer immediately. He remained focused on the horizon as if measuring his thoughts carefully. "Because I know what it feels like to be hunted," he said at last. She turned to him fully. He did not look at her as he continued speaking. "Years ago, men came to my village with promises. They spoke of peace. They spoke of trade. Some believed them, some did not. When trouble followed, it was too late." His voice did not rise. It did not break. It remained steady. But she could hear something beneath it. Memory. "I learned then," he continued, "that not all danger arrives loudly. Sometimes it comes with a smile." She lowered her eyes slightly, thinking of Carter, the polite tone, the easy laugh, the slow change. Dakota finally looked at her. "You left before your trouble became worse," he said. "That takes strength." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Fear is not weakness," he replied. "Fear is a warning. It becomes weakness only when ignored." She thought about that. The rising sun warmed her face now. The cold of night was fading from her bones. She felt tired but clearer. For a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine what would have happened if she had stayed with the wagon train. She would have continued walking beside people who did not respect her choices. She would have lost her voice little by little. Perhaps she would have stopped questioning at all. The thought made her uneasy. "I almost believed him," she said quietly.
"And he said I would not survive alone."
Dakota nodded once. "Words can build cages. And what breaks them?" He met her gaze steadily. "Choice." They stood in silence for a few more moments. Then something shifted in Dakota's expression. He narrowed his eyes slightly and leaned forward. "What is it?" she asked, her pulse quickening again. He was focused on a small movement far to the east. Leela followed his gaze, squinting against the sunlight. At first she saw nothing. Then she noticed it. A single rider. Far away, but moving slowly across the open land. Her heart tightened. "He did not give up," she whispered. Dakota studied the rider carefully. "This one searches differently," he said. "He does not rush." The rider paused occasionally, scanning the ground. He was not circling wildly like before. He was studying. "He may find the canyon," she said, fear creeping back into her voice. "Perhaps," Dakota replied, "or perhaps he only hopes." Leela felt her hands grow cold again despite the sunlight. "What do we do?" she asked. Dakota stepped fully into the open space before the canyon entrance. "We do not hide," he said. "What?" "If he comes close and finds signs of fear, he will push harder," Dakota explained. "If he finds calm, he may turn back." She swallowed. "That seems risky." He gave her a brief look. "Everything is." The rider was closer now, though still at a distance. "Yeah, he had not seen them yet." He was angled slightly away from the canyon. Dakota stood tall, his posture strong but not aggressive. He did not reach for any weapon. He simply placed himself where he could be clearly seen if the rider looked their way. Lila stepped back into the shadow of the canyon wall, though she did not hide completely. Her heart pounded so loudly she felt it in her ears. The rider turned slightly. For a long second it seemed as if he might pass by without noticing them. Then his head lifted. He had seen Dakota. The horse slowed. The rider stopped. The distance between them was still wide enough to prevent clear details, but close enough for tension to stretch across the space. Lila held her breath. Dakota did not move. The rider remained still for several long seconds, studying the figure before him. Even from afar, she could sense hesitation. The rider urged his horse forward a few steps. Dakota stayed exactly where he was. The desert felt silent again, as if the land itself was watching. Finally, the rider called out something. His voice carried faintly through the morning air, though the words were unclear. Dakota answered calmly, his voice steady and firm. The exchange continued for a short while. No shouting, no rushing, just controlled voices crossing the open space. Lila could not hear every word, but she understood the meaning. The rider was asking questions. Dakota was giving very few answers. After a tense pause, the rider looked around carefully.
You scan the rocks, the canyon.
The ground. Leela pressed herself against the stone, barely breathing. Dakota shifted his stance slightly, positioning himself directly between the rider and the canyon entrance. It was not an act of threat. It was a boundary. The rider seemed to understand. Minutes passed like hours. Then, slowly, the rider straightened in his saddle. He looked at Dakota one last time, and then he turned his horse. Lila watched in disbelief as the rider moved away, growing smaller against the bright land. She did not allow herself to breathe fully until he disappeared beyond her eyes. When she finally stepped forward, her legs felt weak. He left, she whispered. Yes, Dakota said simply. Why? He was alone, Dakota replied, and he knew this land is not his. Relief washed over her, warm and overwhelming. The danger had come close, closer than she had hoped. But it had passed. The sun was fully above the horizon now. The desert was bright and clear. The long night had ended. Lila looked at Dakota with new understanding. His price had never been something she could hold in her hands. It had been trust. It had been obedience in moments of fear. It had been the courage to stay still when running felt easier. You said protection has a cost, she said quietly. Yes, I understand now. He studied her face carefully. What do you understand? He asked. That the cost is responsibility, she replied. Not just yours. Mine too. A faint expression of approval crossed his face. You are learning, he said. She looked out at the wide desert once more. For the first time since she had fled the wagon train, she did not feel chased. She felt changed. But deep down, she knew the journey was not over. Dawn had come, and with it, a new decision awaited her. Sunlight stretched across the wide land, warming the rocks and turning the sand a soft golden color. The long night felt like something far away, almost like a dream. But Lila knew it had been real. The fear had been real, the running had been real, and the choice she made had changed everything. She stood near the canyon entrance and watched the horizon carefully. The rider who had searched alone was gone. The others had disappeared long before. The land looked peaceful again, but she understood now that peace was something you protected, not something you waited for. Dakota stepped back into the shade of the canyon and studied her quietly. They will not return today, he said. How can you be sure? She asked. They searched with pride, he replied. Now they will search with frustration. Frustration leads them far away, not back. She had seen that anger in Carter before. When things did not go his way, he pushed harder instead of thinking clearly. For the first time since she had left the wagon train, she allowed herself to breathe deeply without fear tightening her chest. I owe you my life, she said softly. Dakota shook his head once. You owe me nothing. That's not true, she insisted. If you had turned me away, you would have chosen another path, he interrupted gently. You chose courage before you reached my fire. His words settled in her heart. She looked down at her hands. They were scratched and dusty, but steady now. I was shaking when I asked you to hide me, she admitted. Yes, he said simply. I thought your price would be something I could not give. And what did you think that would be? She hesitated, then answered honestly. Something that would take away my freedom again. Understanding crossed his face. Protection that steals freedom is not protection, he said firmly. It is control. She realized then that the greatest fear she carried was not the riders. It was the fear of being trapped again under someone else's power. Dakota stepped out of the canyon and motioned for her to follow. It is time, he said. Time for what? She asked. For you to continue. Continue. She had been so focused on surviving the night that she had not fully thought about what came after dawn. Which way should I go? She asked quietly. Dakota pointed toward the east. There is a small settlement 2 days from here, he said. Travel in the early morning and late afternoon. Rest when the sun is high. Stay near rocky ground when you can. Sand keeps stories, stone does not. She listened carefully, repeating his advice in her mind so she would not forget. 2 days, she said. Yes. You won't come with me? He shook his head gently. My path is here. She understood. The desert was his home. The land knew him, and he knew it. Asking him to leave it would be like asking the sun not to rise. Still, a small part of her felt uncertain about walking alone again. He seemed to sense her doubt. You are not the same woman who ran in fear last night, he said. She looked at him unsure. You ran because you believed you had no choice, he continued. Now you walk because you choose your own direction. The difference felt powerful. She stepped forward into the sunlight, feeling its warmth fully for the first time that morning. The open land did not look as threatening as before. It looked wide.
Open.
Full of possibility. She adjusted her shawl around her shoulders and tightened the strap of her canteen. Then she turned back to him. Why did you really ask for truth as your price? She asked. He considered her question. 'Cause lies travel faster than horses, he said. If you had lied, I would not know which danger to prepare for. Truth gives clear ground to stand on. She smiled slightly at that. And because, he added after a moment, truth shows character. She met his eyes. You believed me. I listened, he corrected. They stood in silence for a few seconds more. Then, in the distance, a faint movement caught her attention again. Not riders. Just dust carried by wind across a far ridge. The desert was alive, always moving in small ways. She took a deep breath. I won't forget this night, she said quietly. Do not remember it as fear, he replied. Remember it as the moment you chose differently. His words felt like something she could carry with her long after the desert was behind her. She gave him a final, grateful look. Thank you, Dakota. He nodded once. Walk with steady steps, he said. And do not let anyone tell you what you cannot survive. The sentence felt like a gift. She turned and began walking east. At first, each step felt uncertain. The land was still rough beneath her feet. The sun would grow hotter as the day moved on. The journey would not be easy. But something inside her had changed. She was not running anymore. She walked with purpose. After a short distance, she glanced back. Dakota still stood near the canyon entrance, watching her, not in control, not commanding, simply ensuring she'd begin safely. When she lifted her hand slightly in farewell, he gave a small nod in return. Then he turned and walked back into the canyon, blending into the land as if he had always been part of it. Lila faced forward again. The desert stretched wide before her. 2 days to the settlement. 2 days to a new beginning. As she walked, she thought about the wagon train, about Carter's confident voice, about the laughter she overheard. The memory no longer filled her with fear. It filled her with clarity. She understood now that control often hides behind kindness. That fear can be a guide instead of a weakness. That courage is not loud or dramatic. It is often quiet, made of small decisions taken step by step. The sun rose higher, warming her shoulders. She followed the path Dakota had shown her, staying close to rocky ground when possible. She rested briefly when needed, remembering his instructions. At one point she paused at the top of a small hill and looked back again, though she could no longer see the canyon. She did not feel alone. The night she had pleaded "hide me till dawn" had not ended in helplessness. It had ended in understanding. The price that once made her tremble, truth and trust, had given her something greater than safety. It had given her strength. And as she continued walking toward the promise of a small settlement beyond the horizon, she knew that no matter where her path led next, she would never again confuse control with protection. The desert wind moved gently at her back now, no longer pushing her in fear but guiding her forward into a life she would choose for herself.